Hello everyone, once again welcome to my YouTube channel. It's Reviving Destinies. Here we revive destinies. So today we have a visitor, the gentleman on my side. Can you introduce yourself shortly, sir?
Oh, thanks for having me, man. My name is Ashley. Yes, YouTuber as well. I have a YouTube on Christian apologetics and Christian commentary. So it's good to be here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Shili Ratau is his name. He didn't introduce it. So let's go to the business of the day. So masculinity is the most criticized thing by feminists around non-religious space today as we are speaking. So today we are going to discuss masculinity in detail. So before we can said lots of things about masculinity, I just want to get your perspective. What is masculinity?
What is masculinity? Masculinity is just basically just a textbook definition. What I'm thinking about is the certain characteristics that distinguish a male from a female, right? Specifically that which relates to a male, of course, right? And obviously, talking about the issue of male-female, there's a lot of controversy these days about what actually a man is, what actually a woman is. But just from a biblical point of view, we understand that God created a man, then God created a woman, and these people have different specific functions. And masculinity are basically those aspects within a man that distinguish him, those things that come biologically, as consequences of you having obviously testosterone, so forth and so on. So those are the qualities. But I think beyond that spectrum of just biology, there's also other things as well involved in that. It could be psychologically as well, how you view things as a man, how you basically deal with things as a man as things go by, your mentality, so forth and so on. But those which are characteristic to a man, yes.
Thank you very much for your honest response. Is masculinity good?
Is masculinity good? Is masculinity good? I think that's a question that it can go either way, right? I think the basic thing is that I think we have to first understand, where does it come from? Where does it come from? It's something that we are given by God. As a man, I'm given masculinity by God, those traits. So I really believe that if God gave it to us, then He meant it for good. You get what I'm saying? And obviously, we understand that we live in a sinful world, and as human beings, that we've fallen short of the standard to which God has created us in the beginning. So there's a lot of it that can be misused. And I really believe that as men, we've been given that gift of masculinity. Now, I like to think of it as a gift because it gives you certain advantages, right, compared to, let's say, a female, right, in certain areas, so forth and so on. We understand that, right? But then it has to be stewarded because, I don't think it's either good or bad. It's amoral, basically. But it depends on how you handle it, how you steward it. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your honest response. Also, I just want to add on that. Also, there are lots of things which are happening in the name of masculinity. So into this case, we are discussing masculinity, not the toxic masculinity. So things can be, I view masculinity as a gift of God, as or the order of God as actually described. But we cannot say it's a bad thing because it's how God handled things. But at the same time, there are people who use that in a bad way. There are people who handle there are certain things which they are good or they are neutral. But how people use them, it makes them to appear as they make that to appear as bad things to the society because of how they've been, or the history of that being misused in the society. So to make an emphasis on that, we are not speaking about toxic masculinity. Actually, also it doesn't defend the toxic masculinity. We are speaking about the masculinity. So don't attack my visitor, my special guest about that issue. We're speaking
But
about
you know, it's a very interesting thing because understand that this topic can be a bit sensitive for some people, in a sense of like, especially today when a lot of masculinity has been spoken of, and maybe the hence is why we're having the conversation out of the concept that we are speaking about the issue, but from which perspective are we speaking from? As maybe a Christian man, you're speaking about a certain issue which to the majority part in terms of in the world has been seen in a negative sense, and because it has been seen in a negative sense, it has been heavily discouraged. All right, and then so it begs the question of saying that now that you still have that aspect, right, how do we maybe portray it in a good light in the world, or even how do we make sense of it from a Christian perspective? Because you mentioned the idea of toxic masculinity, it's there. Like, as much as you might be speaking of this ideal concept of what God wanted, a lot of people's experiences are very different to what God intended in terms of masculinity, and we see that happening, fatherlessness, so forth and so on. But yeah, you mentioned a good point, but I just wanted to throw that in there, that it's a challenge that all of us we have to face.
Thank you very much also like for adding on that. Do you think that the Bible, just try to make a short answer on that. Do you think the Bible encourages masculinity? Like, yeah, as we are emphasizing, not toxic masculinity.
Okay, so do I think the Bible encourages masculinity? I would say yes, based on the definition of masculinity being, as I mentioned, the certain character traits within you that maybe give you a certain edge, a certain advantage. But then those that which God has given you for a certain purpose, everything within you, every privilege that you have points to a purpose, right? Every privilege you have points to a purpose. For instance, the privilege you have as a man of being maybe physically stronger points to the purpose to which God has given you that thing, which is protection, right? The privilege you have, even as a woman, if you have the privilege of being naturally caring or being able to bear children, it points to the responsibility that you have. So I think your question was, does the Bible encourage masculinity, right?
Yes.
Yes, in that context, in a sense of like we have been given a certain privilege, but then that privilege points to a responsibility. So yes, definitely the Bible encourages masculinity, but it encourages masculinity as tied to the responsibility of masculinity, right? You think about all the time that God speaks specifically to men in the Bible. He always mentions the idea of like husbands, okay, maybe love your wives, so forth. So he's sort of like pointing to a certain aspect of the man, but then at the same time he's pointing to responsibility that you have relating to that advantage that I've given you. So definitely 100%, and you know what? It's been, even in the church, I think masculinity has been looked upon, frowned upon, to a certain point where you get men that are not necessarily that masculine in the church, right? Because it has been frowned upon, and also maybe because the church is predominantly women as well, which is another issue. Yeah, but men definitely need to be masculine, men, 100%.
Thank you very much, Ashley. You just make strong emphasis. So, like I'm just adding from what Ashley said, there are certain things, they are the plans of God, but what distort that plans of God to end up rich people is the way people misbehave from those plans of God. Then that end up making the people of the world receive that plan of God, receive what is supposed to be the plan of God in a wrong way, because they are being used in a bad way. So so that's how it is. Hence the original plan of God is that. And also, as we are people also, if we want to solve issues, we have to make sure that we combat every negative things that come with masculinity. In this case, for example, we don't throw away masculinity because of how it's being wrongly used, maybe encouraging gender-based violence, or maybe issues like everything which is happening, genocidal issues which happened in history. But what we have to do is we have to combat those negative consequences which they come with masculinity, not combating masculinity on itself.
Yeah.
So that's how it is. And also one emphasis is also, I've seen that from some feminists on the way. Stop assuming that whenever a man portrays good masculinity, then we assume that a person is encouraging rape culture, or is a bad muscular person. Stop attaching issues of gender-based violence with people who are portraying masculinity, who are not committing gender-based violence. So into that way, we are moving in a very bad direction. You have to call up people when they commit bad things. You don't assume that Wicks is so muscular, therefore you assume that things which other guys who are muscular has done, this means he could have doing. That one is a very stupid way of going. So I just wanted to add from what Ashley spoke as we are heading to the last question, which we are just going to give emphasis on it. That one I'm very interested with, the last question. How can you exhibit masculinity with good character, meaning the character of God, and humility? I hope you get the question well.
You can repeat the question again.
How can you exhibit masculinity? How can you portray that masculinity with God's character? So this means how can you make these two to move together, portraying masculinity and have the God's character, and also humility.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. I think one of the things we need to understand that masculinity is dangerous, and we have to start from there. Why am I saying that? It's a dangerous thing because men are dangerous, right? Like I don't have to even convince people that, because men generally are dangerous and they are capable of, committing hideous things, and we see it, right? The vast majority of people in prisons is men, because in general men are very dangerous. That concept of what God gave you, that just that concept of masculinity in itself, outside of the boundaries of God, it's a very dangerous thing, and it's very hard to contain. And so hence we see, and there's this study that once showed that as men grew, right, especially between the ages of 17 going to like 24, it turns out that those are the ages where a lot of men, especially young men, at I would say they're at their peak when it comes to violence, right? And so we see that a lot of the crimes that are committed are mostly committed by men in those ages. And it correlates with data, because you understand that that's where a lot of young men sort of like enter into the peak of their masculinity. You get what I'm saying? Because that concept is dangerous. And I'm coming to your question. I just wanted to start from there. And so once you try to become a masculine man outside of the boundaries of God, it becomes very hard, and you can do a lot of dangerous things. And hence that I believe that masculinity was meant to be done in the presence of God. Masculinity was meant to be sort of like stewarded within the boundaries of what God has given us, right? So what was the question again? How can you exhibit godly masculinity with humility? And those characters in themselves, and remember the fruits of the Holy Spirit, those characters in themselves, right? They contradict the fleshly desires of masculinity, because masculinity in its fleshly desire has that, sort of like a pumped up, as young men in primary school, you always had that thing of like, you wanted to show that you are the best, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Or you wanted to show that, you are the one who can get the girls, whatever. Because that element of pride manifests itself mostly in men, because that's what the masculinity is outside of the principles of God. And so when we begin to submit it to the presence of God through intentional submission, intentional prayer, because the more you do those things, you become more subject to the Holy Spirit than your flesh. And so the masculinity begins to operate in the lane to which it was meant to operate in the beginning. And God will humble you. And it's very difficult, especially for like also very masculine men. It's very difficult to really humble themselves in the presence of God, because there's that natural desire of wanting to show yourself that you are capable. But anyways, that is just my point basically in a nutshell, that you have to be really intentional in terms of like seeking God, really intentional in prayer, in certain disciplines. Just the discipline of prayer in itself is a very humbling experience. So a man who goes down in their knees and spends time in prayer, that's a very humbling experience, because you are saying to yourself that there's someone greater than me and I'm willing to bow down. So that teaches you a lot, and then it gets all of that pride under control. So I think we need to start from there, prayer, fasting, all of those devotions.
Thank you very much. So, to just also add from what Ashley said, we should not downplay masculinity, cancel masculinity, because that is the original plan of God. But we have to make sure that we let the word of God to direct us into being good masculine people, into being good men. So always tell God that God make me a good man. As a man, make me a man of wisdom. Guide me in my path of being a man. So God cannot guide you to be an abuser, but God will always guide you to manifest his nature. So because masculinity also, like I said, is biblical. So we see people who are condemning masculinity at all the cost. And now, before we go to biblically, let's go to the morally of how productive that masculinity which we condemn is helpful, not toxic masculinity as an emphasis. Now, let's go to the real world. Whenever you look at the issues, specifically, I'm going to mention a race in this case, because mostly people who are being condemned are black men. Of masculinity. I'm not saying yes, a black man, not to defend the black men who are manifesting toxic masculinity. This country, we're in a country, South Africa. When you look at people who built this country, are black men, starting from those Joburg mines, people who were being used as a labor-intensive people. Black men were the one who built South Africa. Also, black women did. We are not it's just that now we are speaking about men. That's why I put an emphasis on that. Black men are the one who were used. Gauteng. The word Gauteng is a name which means a place of gold. That place, it was a black man who worked into that mines, extracting those gold. They were extensively used and paid lower salaries. In the farms, black men were, those ones, both black men and black women, they were being used. All those buildings, all those cities of South Africa, all the cities of South Africa were built by apartheid, by the way. All of them. So, and all of them, black men were used intensively and brutally to build those cities. You can mention them: Port Elizabeth, East London, Cape Town, Pretoria, Johannesburg, Durban, Polokwane. All of them, it was a black man who built those cities. Yes, together with a black woman. It was a black man who used and extensively to build all those cities. So imagine if there was no masculinity which is being condemned today. It's not the medical doctors who build those things. It's not, yes, civil engineers, they only directed how they did, but people who did the job were the builders. It's not the scholars who argues, who make long arguments, who just talk without actions, who build those issues. I'm not going to touch a lot about the Bible, because I want to accommodate anyone. I just wanted to touch, because most of people, they say we only rely on that Bible. But now I'm just trying to touch, show everyone that even in the practical world, the masculinity, good masculinity, is the core fundamental of the existence of the economies, existence of the successes of the country, both economic growth and economic development. And we cannot have economic development if there is no economic growth. So that is the truth of the matter, as she spoke. However, when you are a man, you should manifest good masculinity. The masculinity of working diligently, not being an abuser, doing all that thing. And also, whenever we make a statement, we should understand that there are some statements, when you make them, if you didn't investigate it that much, they will work against you. Whenever they come back to hit you, you will notice that you don't just release statements out of anger, out of everything. So that's how it is on my side. I'm not going to quote verses a lot, because the Bible explicitly make it clear that a man he shall eat the fruit of his labor, in the book of Genesis. So that one, like in the Bible, there are lots of passages which you can quote emphasizing that case. On my side, I rest my case on that. I don't know what you have on this case, Ashley, which you just wanted to add.
No, I think we've definitely exhausted. Well, to a certain degree, there's a lot that can be said about this more. But yeah, no, I think that's my point. Yeah, I'm really happy with that.
Thank you very much for those who have watched this video. Please don't forget to like it, subscribe, share it with other people. Let me see you in the next video. That's Reviving Destinies. It's a palace of truth. Shalom.